friends, welcome back. Let us continue with our discussion with this unit module 9, that is conflicting behavior. Today I am going to discuss about new topic, that is impression management. Very important topic to be discussed in organizational behavior, where people tend to modify their behavior in a very manipulative and tactful manner in order to get the things done. This is something I am speaking in a very layman fashion, but if we talk about in a very technical language that what is impression management, it is something where we tend to target the person who has some authority or power in order to approve your behavior or any strategy, and we tend to identify those traits and characteristics of the target person, and when we trace those traits and characteristics, we tend to modify our behavior accordingly so that we become more likable to that person. So, this is ultimately a motive, an individual's interest, a manipulation and tact which is being adopted by any person in order to gain approval or compliance from the target person. And this is one of the most ulterior motive. Ulterior motive means most insidious motive of every individual. Every individual tries to create an impression of himself in a very positive manner so that you become more likable and the decision goes in your favor. This is a strategy in order to gain approval from the target person. So, in this section I am going to talk about that what is the process of impression management and what are the tactics of impression management, where an individual involves himself, indulges in different kind of behaviors. So, what is impression management? It is a goal directed behavior and is a conscious process and involves the intentional use of tactics to manipulate the impressions that others form about us in social interaction. It involves efforts to produce first impression on others. So, we tend to indulge in different behaviors that we seek approval from the other person and we try to create a very positive impression on the other, so that our perception becomes very positive. Therefore, it is a most ulterior motive that goes beyond the maintenance of smooth social relations. These behaviors include providing explanations for a negative event to escape disapproval. So, in order to avoid any negative situation or impression, we tend to indulge in behaviors where we create an impression about ourselves, which is basically an excuse in order to avoid any kind of disliking or disapproval. This is a kind of behavior that any individual will engage in. It also includes excuses in order to deny responsibility for negative outcomes. Whenever any negative outcome is being confronted by an individual, he will try to pose himself in a very positive manner and will not take that responsibility of that negative outcome. So, in order to avoid that impression, the person will find different kind of excuses in a way that the target person will try to be convinced that whatever he is saying is right in order to avoid. And the last is opinion conformity, that is speaking or behaving in ways consistent with the target. So, you are trying to modify your behavior in a very manipulative manner according to the target person, so that the target person will be impressed by you that you have the same quality of traits and characteristics which he already has. So, that creates a very positive impression about that person. These are the accounts of impression management. Therefore, by utilizing such behaviors, those who partake in impression management are able to control others' perceptions of them or events pertaining to them. So, they will try to regulate that particular social situation accordingly. So, in a way that they tend to be so presentable to the target person that the whole situation will turn in their favor. So, this is about impression management, which involves all the kind of manipulative techniques that a person indulges in order to create a very positive impression. And what is the intention behind that impression creation is in order to avoid any responsibility or excuse, so that he should not be blamed. Therefore, what are the aims of impression management? The primary aim of impression management is to enable oneself to obtain favorable outcomes. This is the most foremost and important aim of impression management. The second is to gain social approval. Definitely everybody wants to be highlighted as a part, a special member of the group. So, they will try to engage in very positive patterns of behavior in a way that people will like them. And third, it requires identifying the norms that dictate how one should present oneself in order to gain approval. As I mentioned, that the person who indulges in techniques of impression management, they will try to filter out very important information of a particular situation in terms of norms, that what are those behaviors that are accepted, and they try to inculcate those behaviors within them for a particular purpose, or they will try to match their behavior with any target person. So, immediately that impression becomes positive, as there will be widespread agreement about which behaviors will lead to positive and negative evaluation. So, if any individual who indulges in impression management techniques, definitely he will prepare himself in order to align with the norms that are acceptable, and then make him more likable in comparison to the other people. So, these are the aims of impression management. Ultimately, the totality is that in order to gain approval, be it any social situation or any favorable outcome. What is the phenomena of impression management? How impression management takes place? It is not that we are there in the situation, we have changed our behavior and people will like us. It is not like that. It is again a process. Different kind of impressions are created in different kind of situations. So, these are all phenomena that exist in any situation. The first phenomena is primacy effect. As we say that the first impression is the last impression. The impression that is created in the first instance, that will have a lasting impact on the target person. This is primacy effect. So, whatever it describes that the tendency for information that we learn first about an individual is weighed heavily than information that we learn later. So, if we tend to hear something good about the person, then we try to weigh heavily on that information and we maintain a very positive information about that person. This is primacy effect. That is the primary information that we receive in the first instance, which is positive, we tend to develop a positive impression about that person and will continue to the last information, because it has a positive spillover effect on the other information we receive, irrespective that maybe some negative information is also there. The other is recency effect. This is also not to say that first impression is the last impression. Sometimes what happens, that maybe we tend to get some information, positive information in the last, and that is most influential. Maybe initially we tend to receive some negative information about that person, but maybe later on we tend to receive some positive information about that person, and that information that comes later will have more influence on the other person. So, they tend to develop a positive impression about that other person. So, this is recency effect. Primacy in the first instance and recency, that any positive information that comes later will be more influential in creating any positive impression about that person. Therefore, the recency effect describes the tendency for the information that comes later is given more weightage. The other is halo effect or the additive effect. This is very important. What is halo effect or additive effect? It is also known as halo error. It is a tendency for positive impressions of a person in one area to positively or negatively influence one's opinion or feelings in another area. So, whatever information we have received in one area of for an individual, maybe that information is positive or negative, it has spillover effect on other areas when we are trying to assess that person. So, if it is positive information in one area, we will have a spillover impression formation on the other area, that is positive. If it is about negative information, we will form negative information about the same person in other areas as well. So, it is adding on. So, one positive information will add on more positive information and impression. One negative information will tend to add more negative information and impression of that person. So, once we have formed a positive impression, the new negative information just does not seem as bad as it might have been had we learned it first. So, if we have positive information and later we receive any negative information, that negative information will not be perceived as negative, rather that negative information will be bypassed or it will have very minimum effect on the target person. This is additive effect or halo error. For example, when a person finds out someone, they have formed a positive gestalt. Now, gestalt is a pure psychological term which means perception, when we perceive a person in totality. So, this is positive gestalt or the overall information has cheated on his or her taxes. Because of the positive gestalt, the person may dismiss the significance of this behavior and may even think that the person simply made a mistake. So, we have positive information about one person, and even if we come to know that he has made some financial misappropriation, indulged in financial misappropriation, that negative information will also be perceived as positive, where we can say, or it can be dismissed, that maybe he has simply made a mistake. It can never be a crime made by him. So, one positive gestalt or impression will try to fade away the negative information as well. So, the person would justify the behavior and connect with your positive gestalt. Thus, halo effect refers to the tendency we have to evaluate an individual high on many traits because of a shared belief. So, when any panel is there, if 2% have formed a positive gestalt or impression, then maybe other 3 persons will also tend to develop a tendency to develop a positive gestalt or perception about that person. This is about halo effect or halo error. Next comes techniques of impression management. Now, whatever we have discussed, the process, the phenomena or the aims of impression management, but ultimately those aims are fulfilled only when an individual engages himself, indulges himself in different kinds of impression management tactics. The first is ingratiation. It is a strategic behavior that requires efforts to win the liking and approval of the target person and is usually regarded as strategic, insincere and manipulative. So, maybe the person will indulge in behavior in a strategic behavior where he will himself try to throw some charm to the other person, that is to the target person, and the target person will be in a position to like or approve that person in any situation. This is ingratiation, which is insincere, manipulative and strategic. So, this can also be indulging in some kind of inappropriate behavioral patterns. This is ingratiation. The other is intimidation. It is about showing more anger or verbal aggression to the other person, that is the target person, where the target person is made fearful or timid, and under such kind of behavior the target person is compelled to take decision in the favor of that person or give approval to that person. So, this involves showing anger or verbal aggression to the target person and gain compliance. Compliance means agreeing to what the other person is saying. So, this can refer to the act of making someone feel timid or afraid. The other is self-handicapping. Again, it is a strategic, manipulative and tactful behavior where the person tries to create an impression about himself onto other that he is helpless and sad, he is in distressed, and when this kind of impression is created on the other person, the target person himself automatically tends to extend his support in order to fulfill his motive. This is self-handicapping. I do not have money, I do not have much resources in order to fulfill my aim or even to survive, and as soon as that impression is created, the target person will extend his hand in order to help that person, and ultimately the motive is achieved. The other is flattery. This is the most common form of tact that any person would indulge in. We also understand this word. It is an act of giving excessive compliments to the target person, and the person is so much impressed while hearing good words for him that he creates a positive gestalt for that person and gains approval. This is flattery, the most common form of impression management technique. Slime effect. It is again a very tactful impression management technique, a behavioral tendency of an employee who is likable towards superiors and dislikable towards subordinates and is judged by other co-workers as extremely dislikable and slimy. Maybe one co-worker is engaging in different kind of impression management techniques, for example, ingratiation, flattery to the higher authorities in order to gain approval and making his survival more robust, and at the same time the same person is having or behaving in a very unprofessional or in a very ruthless manner with his subordinates. Obviously, subordinates will not like him, but the higher authorities or superordinates will like the same co-worker. This is slime effect. It is like licking upwards and kicking downwards. So, this is slime effect, a behavioral tendency of an employee who is likable towards superiors and dislikable towards subordinates and is judged by the co-workers as extremely dislikable and slimy. This is slime effect. And the last is self enhancements. This is about increasing your appeal to others. in form of grooming yourself in terms of physical appearances and adopting props which makes you more attractive. So, these are the efforts to increase one's own appeal to others and include strategies to boost their physical appearances through the style of dress, personal grooming and use of props. For example, there are people who tend to enhance their personality and physical appearances by wearing specs, and that gives an impression that he is a very intellectual person. Wearing sunglasses, maybe expensive sunglasses, and a well suited person will be perceived with a positive gestalt that he is an affluent person. So, these are self enhancements. So, thus we can conclude that impression management requires careful planning to discover those traits that participants in the interaction are most likely to approve. But this requires lot of hard work. First, in order to understand the situation, that what are the acceptable norms and behaviors, then modifying your behavior accordingly and understanding the people or the target person, what he or she will like and dislike. So, these are the impression management techniques which can only be adopted when a person indulges in careful planning to discover those traits that participants interaction are most likely to approve, right. So, this is about impression management. We are through with this unit. Tomorrow I am going to discuss about the new module, module 10. That is all for today. Thank you so much.